Hey, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is Grief and Grace. If we've never met, my name is Dave Bailey. I have a background in a variety of social work settings, and I currently work for the biggest provider of funeral services in North America. And so my professional life revolves around grief and walking people through their lived experience of it. Right now, we are in the middle of what can only be described as a national experience of grief. And with all the responses and the protests and the rage and the introspection, and I believe the change that is taking place, now more than ever, conversations about grief have an important place at the table. So, thank you for being here. I am incredibly excited for you to meet my guest tonight. Jason Rosenthal is the New York Times best-selling author of My Wife Said You May Want to Marry Me, a memoir. And I'm just super thankful that you're here tonight, Jason.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So your book was so compelling for me that I couldn't put it down. I read it in 2 sittings. It's I know it says it's a memoir, but it's so much more than that. It's a memoir. It's a love story. It's a journey through loss and the work of creating meaning. It's a guidebook. And for me to say that I was deeply touched would be to do it a disservice. So, yeah, thank you.
Oh, thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
I'm glad I gave you that. Yeah.
Thank you, Jason. So, I hope that you're okay with me reading some of your quotes from the book back to you and asking you to expand on them.
You bet.
Yeah. So we should start here. For someone that might not be familiar with your story, can you give us an overview?
Yeah, sure. So on March 3rd of 2017, my wife, Amy Krause Rosenthal, wrote a modern love column for the New York Times. And that article was published 10 days before she died of ovarian cancer. And the essay was a beautiful piece of writing. It was profoundly sad, but it was funny. And it was real life, and it was sort of written in the way that it was a creative play on a personal ad for me.
Yes.
And so what happened to me as I was at the same time, deep in the throes of grief, was it sort of catapulted me into this position that I never expected to be in, and that was to really be grieving publicly, and ultimately to be a messenger for some very, very difficult topics.
Wow.
That's why I'm here today. My background is I'm a lawyer. I've been a trial lawyer for about 30 years, practicing law here in Chicago, and now my life is very, very different than that.
Yes.
And we can go into some of those things.
Very different than that. Yeah. So along this journey of love and loss, both you and Amy made a decision to share your story of grief with all of us, starting with the column, your response to the column. You then begin to travel and speak, TED Talks, a variety of speaking. And I've heard you say that sharing your story of loss is healing. And could you just tell us a little bit more about that? Because you've taken something extraordinarily private and put it out for all of us to see. And you've made a connection that I don't think a lot of people make. When people think about grief, often they tend to think only of death. But in the middle of all of this, and in your journey through all of this, you've made a much bigger connection to loss of any kind and the grief that follows loss.
Yes, that's really true. So, as I began to tell my story, and it's kind of an unusual way of introducing my story to the world, I started sort of at a level that I didn't expect, and that was to give a TED Talk on the main stage, like you said, and that was in April of 2018, about 13 months after Amy had died. And literally immediately after I gave that talk, I was inundated with people right there in the audience that day wanting to talk to me and share stories of loss.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at first, before then, And even around that time, I thought, how can you be sharing your story of loss with me? I just lost Amy. This is my life of 26 years. This is my partner, the
Yes.
mother of my three children. But really, as I began to, catapult that opportunity into other speaking engagements and things like that, I heard stories from people all over the world. And I quickly shifted my perspective and realized that for those of us going through loss, it doesn't really matter what it is, whether it's the loss of a dear family pet, the loss of a job, going through a divorce, hitting rock bottom, all of those stories that I heard, I quickly made the connection that loss is loss is loss, as I wrote. And that became a really powerful thing for me.
Yeah. We were talking the other day, and got to talking about this, about the concept of loss, and talking about how, because we don't recognize that, from an early age, we don't recognize the emotions attached to loss. We don't, a child comes home from school and they've lost their favorite toy and they're crying. We don't identify that as grief, and so we don't give them permission to grieve. We don't give them language of grief. Lots of times if it's a boy, we'll say, grow up, boys don't cry, or whatever. So we grow up really grief illiterate until you come face to face with incredible grief like you experienced, and all of a sudden you realize, wait a second, there's a thread of grief that runs through my whole life. And part of the interesting thing to me is that grief is part of what connects us as human beings. It's so amazing that people wanted to tell you their story of loss and say, you connected to me, can I connect to you as I tell you about my loss? It's amazing.
Yeah, it's really true. And people at first were trying to just share those stories, I think, to comfort me and to be there for me and my family. But I was somehow also there for them. So it was like this communal grieving process. And it's important, I've learned, to share those stories, because like you said, first of all, yes, you may have loss and grief in your past, but I can promise you that as you reach a certain age, there will for sure, be a story of loss in your own life.
Yes.
And what's interesting is that when you start to talk about it, it will connect you with people on a level that you didn't anticipate, much deeper level.
Wow. I think that's an important concept. When you start to talk about it, it'll connect you with people on a far deeper level. I often talk about how the fabric of grief is woven from so many different strands, like anger and regret and despair and love and loneliness and remembrance and honor and a hundred other emotions. And the tapestry that we weave out of all of those threads is unique and individual. So how would you describe your experience of grief?
Well, what I've said before, and I don't think it's a unique concept, is that grief has no timetable.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, at the beginning of your loss, if it's profound and if it's based in love, which mine was, there's going to be some extraordinarily dark times, and that's okay. It's okay to lean into that and to accept how that feels, because slowly you'll come to understand that it's almost as if it was a gift to help you move forward, because you realize that grief comes from a deep place of love, and how lucky you were to have that love, to be able to grieve in that way. So, my own personal story is a bit complicated with grief, but again, it's not unique. I lost my wife, Amy, and then had a series of losses for the next 2 years, culminating in the death of one of my role models in life, my father-in-law, less than 2 years later. So I learned a lot about loss, taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back.
Wow. You talk about in the book about how your body physically experienced grief in the form of anxiety and panic, and there was a time when you even thought you might be having a heart attack. And out of that, you began to realize some of the things that you needed for you to take care of you in that situation.
Yeah, as caretakers, we are laser focused. We have one job, and that is to make those that we're taking care of comfortable and loved and filled with beauty, and just to help that transition to death. And so you don't really think that much about yourself, in my own personal experience. And what I realized shortly after Amy died is that, yeah, I had sort of let myself go. I was putting on my pants and they were falling down, and I'm a pretty active guy normally, and it sort of dropped all of the exercise and stuff. And you sort of come to the realization that you got to take care of yourself too.
Yes.
And that eventually happened to me, and it was so important in my progress out of the deep dark depths of grief was to start to take care of myself.
Yes.
And for me, that came through, meditation and yoga and exercise, and getting myself back into a emotional and physical shape.
And good friends. You had some really good friends.
And good friends. And good friends. I'm so blessed, and family. And for me, going to see a therapist for the first time in my life.
Yeah.
I can't recommend it enough.
Wow. I loved how you said that after Amy's death, listening to music took on a whole new meaning. Now you and Amy both were like music crazy. You have such an eclectic taste in music, and I want to personally thank you for the shout out to Luke Siddall Sings music. I'd never heard of him before, but I am, fallen in love with his music. And there's parts of his music, he sounds to me like Neil Young sometimes in some of the songs, some of the music. But great lyrics, great music. So, and you said that music brought you toward emotions that were the essential elements in the grieving process. And I found that sentence fascinating. So what were those emotions that you needed to deal with along your journey, and how for you did music help?
Yeah, like you said, music has always been a huge part of my life, and my life before Amy, my life with Amy, and up to the present day. Which we can talk about as another form of loss. I really do miss going to see live music. But in all seriousness, I think what I said in the book was that it sort of started to reignite my pilot light.
Yes.
Because I remember those moments of joy, and it also took on some new meaning for me, because when I heard Luke Siddall sing, for example, I needed that connection to the sadness. I mean, he's a self-described singer of sad songs, and I needed to be in that place where I was sitting in my car and just crying and letting all of that stuff out. And then there were other times where later music brought me back to joy. I found myself in the car jamming to The Who, or being at a live concert and moving around a little bit, smiling and dancing again. Yeah, so music has definitely been a big part of my journey forward.
Yeah, I can identify with that. When I had my cancer diagnosis and went through that for 18 months, I'd go to the gym and put my headphones on, and I would just lift and dance, and I didn't care who looked at me. I had a playlist that was like, you are going to get through this. And so it's pretty amazing. And for you,
great.
Yeah, your story of Burning Man made me smile quite a bit. And I wanted to ask you this question, because I have a dear friend who went through the loss of her husband with brain cancer, and there were some people in her life, in their life, dear friends in their life, that just couldn't make that journey with them all the way to the end. And I see to this day, I see the pain that caused. And so, what advice would you give to someone who said, I have a friend whose loved one is dying, and I don't contact them, or I don't go see them because I just don't know what to say and I don't know how to act around them?
Yeah, it's a very important part, I think, of the book because it's resonated so much with people. And like you said, it's maybe it is part of a how-to book, but it really I didn't set out
No.
to do that. Um, it is to me as simple as saying something. I know that's very simplistic, but really what I mean is, if you know someone who's going through a situation that's very dark and painful, is to just acknowledge it. To say, I understand that this is tough, man. And you can even say something like, I don't know what to say.
Yes.
I just want you to know I'm thinking about you. And I tell some stories of some friends of ours that went the extra mile, but it was almost like it wasn't a mile, it was like an inch, because for them it was simple. And so I told the story of one friend who came to the house every Saturday, and Amy's legacy color is yellow, so
Yes.
bust the umbrella.
Yes. I'm going to ask you about
But
that.
he would drop off 3 yellow items to the house
Wow.
every week that we were in hospice. Silly things like, a can of mustard and a blow-up doll and a rubber ducky or something,
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't expect anything. He didn't even expect to see Amy or me, and they were just always there. There's some other stories in the book about really simple things that you can do to be present.
Yes. And stories about people that didn't make that journey with you, and the
That's
pain
true
of
too.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true too. Right. People who
Yeah.
just don't know what to say.
Don't know what to say. Yeah. So, yeah. You talked about the loss that you experienced not long after Amy's passing. Your dad also passed away, and you talked about the blessing that it was in the middle of all that. That your son Miles had moved back in with you. And you said the combination of your dad's death, Arnie's death, and living with Miles helped me realize just how much of my future needed to be spent appreciating what I had, not dwelling on what I'd lost. And I know that's true, and everyone knows that that's true, but I also know that is easier said than done. So how were you able, or what thoughts or what techniques did you use to keep pivoting back towards that idea? Because I know it's easy to get off course, and to keep pivoting back to the idea of being appreciating what you had, what you will have, and not dwelling on what you'd lost.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of a few things. One is your makeup. You have a decision to make, and that decision could be dark. It could be going to the bar every day, getting lost in a bottle of whiskey. Believe me, that was something I thought about. But the other side is really based on that significant loss that you have, realizing that, hey, you never know when that last moment's going to occur, and there's a lot of life to live and a lot to be thankful for. And for me, because I had 3 kids who I know depended on me and who I love so dearly, that was certainly motivation to get back up and to appreciate what I had.
Yes. Interesting. So there's a pretty deep quote in the book where you say, how arrogant of us to believe that there will always be more time. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Amy's first word was more. And that really sort of captured how she lived her life. She always sucked the life out of every day. She stormed out of bed and had something to do, and did it every day. And she wanted more. She wrote about wanting more in her essay. more time with me and the kids, and more time to create and to learn and to grow. And I had really used that, not only in my response piece to hers. I wrote a modern love column as well, talking about wanting more.
Yes.
But I also use it in the book, sort of as it became sort of a theme for me too. That's where I'm at. I have this empty space that I'm filling, and I'm trying to fill it deliberately with more.
Hmm. Tell us a little bit about the yellow umbrella.
Sure. So one of the things that I knew I wanted to do after Amy died was to commission a piece of public art here in Chicago in Amy's honor. And her legacy symbol has become the yellow umbrella, based on a wonderful project your viewers should take a look at on YouTube called The Beckoning of Lovely, and you'll see what I mean by the yellow umbrella. But so I commissioned that piece of public art. It took me 2 years to navigate the city of Chicago and the Chicago Park District. And it adorns a lovely park here in Chicago now. And it has the word more written on the inside of a beautiful piece of glass. And the glass top to the umbrella has photographs that the artist put, of yellow flowers that grow right there in that garden.
Wow. Wow. And you started a foundation?
I did, yes. It's called the Amy Krause Rosenthal Foundation. And the mission is twofold. One is to raise awareness of early detection of ovarian cancer. Statistics show that late stage finding out of ovarian cancer, unfortunately, is very, very, very much more common and results in a mere 20% 5-year survival rate. Whereas early detection shoots that number way up to around 90%.
Wow.
But there is no existing test. And so we've issued a grant. I'm really proud to announce that we've issued a grant for researchers to just start chipping away at that. And the other aspect of the mission is child literacy.
Yes.
And based on our relationships with publishers, we've been able to donate tens of thousands of books to kids in need all over the country.
Wow. Amy wrote 8 books?
Amy published 35 children's.
Oh, I seriously underestimated that. 35 children's books.
And she wrote a bunch of nonfiction adult sort of humor books, but 2 major memoirs.
Yes. I told you when we talked, but I didn't. I just want to say it here. This is Amy's book. See if I can get it on camera here. I Wish You More. Obviously, with more being the very first word she ever said, and the way she lived her life. And I didn't realize, when I watched your TED Talk and read the columns, somehow I didn't put 2 and 2 together. And then I realized that I had Amy's book, this book, on my shelf, going through a period. My dad had passed away. I was struggling to process all of that grief. I was absorbing the grief of hundreds of families that I was serving. I was going through my cancer journey. My marriage had dissolved, and I was in a really, really bad place. And a friend of mine sent me Amy's book, which was ostensibly written as a children's book, but it comforted my inner child over and over and over again. And I would read, at low periods of my life, I'd pull that book off my shelf and I would just read, I wish you more, I wish you more. And I think one of my favorite ones in there is, I wish you more Will than Hill. That was one of my favorite. One of the things
That's a great story.
Yeah,
thank you for sharing that. It's a terrific story.
Thank you. And that book, I was looking the other day, 58 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list still. And if you don't have it in your library, go and get it. Read it to your kids at least once a week, and then give it as a gift when they graduate from elementary school or high school or college or wherever. when you have it in your heart to wish someone more. It'll just bring you to such a sweet, sweet place. So one of the things that you talk about in the book is the gift of blank space that Amy gave you. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, she really battled to get that blank space in a major newspaper. Like, what do you mean you want you want us to not put any writing there? It's valuable space. No, but seriously, she was a big part of the theme of that piece that she wrote. And of course, originally it was for me to fill my life with another love story, but I've used that much more than that, and I've used it as a metaphor as I continue to proceed forward. It's helped guide me so much. I talk about it, I try to live it, and even now, as I sit here today, people ask me, so what's next, Jason? And let me get through this book process first. But
yes.
I do feel like I have this incredible gift of that blank space that is still something that I am waiting to fill.
Yeah. Amy lived life with great passion, and she wanted you to continue to live life the same way.
Yes.
It's amazing. It's amazing. All right. Well, I always try to close our live with something practical that people can do, something that they can, just a simple thought that they can put into the texture of their life. And so let me ask you that. What one thing or one simple idea or one healing step would you suggest that's been meaningful to you in your journey?
I think it's a combination of two things. I know you said one, but
you can take as much time as you want.
Amy talked about what she called the crevices of life. We all have milestones and things we look forward to, birthdays and anniversaries and whatever it may be. But many of us sort of pass through those moments that are the in-between moments. And so my suggestion would be, and I've tried to do this, I always continue to learn from Amy, is to really try to appreciate the simple things, that life has to offer. And one of the ways that I've been able, one tool that's been helpful to me in doing that is a daily meditation practice. And it can be as short as 10 minutes a day, and that's what I've done. So I would say a combination of reframing how you walk through life and a little bit of meditation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I use Tara Brach's 10-minute smile meditation, and that really helps me reset and reframe. It's super good. Jason, I am extraordinarily thankful that you gave us the generous gift of your time tonight to come and share your heart and share your story. I feel like your voice has been in my head as I've watched your TED Talk again and again over the months, and I just cannot thank you enough for the gift that you have given all of us in this book, and I'm so thankful for you coming and being here tonight.
I'm really, really, really glad we connected, so thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Even after this live is over, you can still leave comments or questions, and I'm going to be coming back to review the comments, interact with you as we go forward. And don't forget to click on notifications so that you can get a reminder whenever it is that we are ready to go live. And if you've gotten value out of this, please feel free to share it across your social media platforms, and go to your local bookseller if you have one, or go to your favorite online retailer and buy Jason's book. My wife said you may want to marry me, a memoir. Go on the TED Talk, watch the TED Talk, read the columns. Your heart, your life will be enriched because of it. So next Monday our guest is the multi-fascinating Cheryl Jones, who is a marriage and family therapist, an educator, and host of the radio show Good Grief on Voice America. Cheryl knows the face of grief, Her first wife was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, which at the time was a uniformly terminal illness with a 6-month to 1 year prognosis. But that prognosis for them stretched out over 8 years. And in that 8 years, Cheryl engaged daily in the work of preparing for her wife's death. And so, the things that she has to say come out of a journey that she's walked. And you don't want to miss her story, her insights, and her wisdom. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you, Jason, for being here. And we will see you next Monday.